She stood there bruised, shaking, surrounded by flashing lights and accusing eyes. To them, she wasn't a victim, she was a problem. When she said her husband was a Navy SEAL, they laughed, convinced it was another lie meant to escape blame. The tension grew as minutes passed, cruelty turning into confidence. But then something changed. A sudden silence. A shift in the air. What happened next forced everyone present to confront a truth they never expected, and exposed how dangerous prejudice can be when power goes unchecked. Would justice finally arrive, or was it already too late? And before you go any further, take a second to really sit with that moment. If stories like this matter to you, if they deserve to be seen and remembered, let this one play out fully, because what happens next is exactly why these stories can't be ignored. Before that night, her life was ordinary in the quiet, hard-working way that rarely makes headlines. She was a devoted wife, a mother, and a woman who believed that following the rules was enough to keep you safe. Her days were filled with responsibilities, small routines, and the comfort of knowing her husband served his country with honor. She trusted the system because she had been taught to. She believed respect was mutual and protection was guaranteed. That evening began like so many others. She was worn out but calm, focused on getting home, unaware that she was already being watched. A minor situation escalated faster than it should have, turning confusion into suspicion. The looks she received were not curious or concerned. They were cold and judgmental. To those around her, her presence alone seemed to invite scrutiny. As the moments passed, her fear grew, not because she had done something wrong, but because she could feel how quickly control was slipping away. Every movement she made was misread. Every word was weighed against her skin color rather than the truth. She sensed that no explanation would be enough, no compliance sufficient. Deep down, she knew something was about to break. The situation was no longer about rules or order. It was about power, assumptions, and how easily dignity can be stripped away. And while she stood there, unaware of what was about to unfold, one truth remained hidden from everyone watching. This story was not going to end the way they expected. The moment control slipped from her hands, everything accelerated. What began as confusion hardened into suspicion, and suspicion quickly turned into force. She felt hands grabbing, pressure tightening, and the world narrowing to harsh movements and louder authority. Every attempt to remain calm was met with more aggression, as if her composure itself was an insult. The fear wasn't sudden, it built slowly, crawling into her chest as she realized compliance was no longer protecting her. The crowd nearby did not intervene. Some watched in silence. Others turned away. Their stillness felt heavier than the force around her, a reminder that isolation often comes before injustice. She was no longer seen as a person with a life and a family. In that moment, she became a stereotype, reduced to assumptions that required no proof. The more she tried to explain, the more resistance she faced. Her words were dismissed before they could land. If this moment makes you feel uncomfortable, it should. And if you've ever seen something like this happen, or lived it yourself, let that thought stay with you. Stay with this story, because what's coming next changes everything. When she mentioned her husband's service, it only fueled the situation. What she believed was a grounding truth was treated like a joke, an excuse that confirmed their bias rather than challenged it. The tension thickened. Their confidence grew. They moved as if untouchable, certain no consequence would follow. Bruises formed where dignity once stood, and humiliation settled deeper than pain. Time stretched in strange ways. Seconds felt endless. Her thoughts drifted between fear and disbelief, struggling to understand how quickly everything had turned hostile. She thought of home, of the life waiting for her, and of the trust she once placed in uniforms and authority. That trust was unraveling in real time. Around her, the environment felt colder, sharper, and less human. Then, something shifted. Not immediately, but enough to be felt. The energy changed. Movements slowed. The confidence that had driven the cruelty wavered, replaced by uncertainty. She noticed glances exchanged, posture stiffening, and attention suddenly drawn elsewhere. The space around her, once filled with dominance, grew tense and cautious. No announcement explained the change. No apology softened the moment. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone not living inside it. But she felt it. The balance of power was no longer settled. The same people who moments ago acted without hesitation now seemed aware of eyes beyond the scene, of accountability inching closer. Her fear did not disappear. If anything, it sharpened. Because whatever was coming next would either seal her humiliation or expose the truth behind it. The silence grew louder than the noise before. Every breath felt deliberate, measured, as though the next moment would define everything. She did not know who was approaching or why the atmosphere had shifted so suddenly. She only knew that the story was no longer moving in a straight line. Something unseen was stepping into the frame, something capable of changing how this moment would be remembered. And as the tension reached its breaking point, one question lingered in the air. Would justice finally surface, or would this be another story buried beneath excuses and silence? The breaking point arrived without warning. What had been chaos suddenly froze into a moment so heavy it felt unreal. The same authority that moments ago moved with unchecked confidence now hesitated. The air shifted, thick with awareness. The scene was no longer isolated. Eyes were watching. Phones were raised. Consequences were no longer abstract. She felt it before she fully understood it. The pressure eased. Movements became careful and restrained, as if an invisible line had been crossed. The cruelty that once felt effortless now looked uncertain, even afraid. The truth she had spoken earlier, the one that was mocked and dismissed, was no longer treated as impossible. It hovered over everything, undeniable and dangerous to ignore. Her body ached, but her mind sharpened. This was the moment where everything could finally be seen clearly. The injustice, the assumptions, the way power had been used without restraint. The people who had reduced her to a stereotype were now forced to confront the weight of their actions. The balance had shifted, not because of mercy, but because reality had arrived. The crowd sensed it too. Whispers spread. The energy changed from passive observation to quiet anticipation. This was no longer just an incident. It was a reckoning unfolding in real time. The system that had closed ranks moments earlier now seemed exposed and fragile under scrutiny. She stood at the center of it all, bruised but unbroken, realizing that survival alone was not the victory. Being seen was. Being believed was. And in that fragile pause, something far more powerful than force emerged. The truth, standing tall where fear once ruled. As the moment stretched on, one question became impossible to escape. Would this turning point finally bring accountability, or would it be twisted, minimized, and buried like so many before it? The answer was coming, and it would define far more than just her story. The night did not end with cheers or celebration. It ended quietly, heavy with realization. The situation was diffused, not because the harm had never happened, but because it could no longer be denied. She was finally given space, medical attention, and a voice, but none of it erased what had already been done. The bruises would fade. The memory would not. She went home changed, carrying the weight of a truth she had always known but never hoped to face so directly. In the days that followed, questions surfaced. Reports were written. Statements were reviewed. Attention came not because she suffered, but because power had been challenged. Her husband's service forced accountability into a moment where it might otherwise have vanished. And that reality stayed with her. Justice should never depend on who you know or what uniform someone wears. Yet for her, that night proved how often it does. The emotional impact lingered long after the physical pain eased. Trust was fractured. The belief that doing everything right would keep her safe was gone. But something else took its place, a clarity she could not unsee. What happened to her was not rare. It was familiar to countless others whose stories never reached a turning point, never found witnesses, and never forced pause. Her experience became part of a larger conversation, one that stretches far beyond a single incident. It reflected a system where bias can escalate ordinary moments into life-altering trauma, where silence protects wrongdoing, where dignity is conditional, and where survival is too often mistaken for justice. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, reflective, or uncomfortable, don't let that feeling stop here. Share your thoughts in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe these voices deserve a platform, stay with this channel, follow along, and make sure you don't miss the stories that still need to be told. This story is not about one woman or one night. It is about what happens when prejudice meets power, and what it takes to interrupt that cycle. The question left behind is not whether this could happen again. It already has. The real question is how many more lives must be shaken before accountability becomes the rule instead of the exception. And when the moment comes to speak, to witness, or to act, will we finally choose to listen?